Hello, my name is Stephen Janis, and I'm a reporter for the Real News Network in Baltimore. I am standing in West Baltimore, where Governor Larry Hogan just announced a slew of tax breaks for Baltimore City to help fix the ailing economy, almost $700 million. But will it work? To find out, we talked to a Towson University economist, Dr. Cecilia, to see if tax breaks really are the answer for Baltimore's entrenched poverty. Governor Hogan has rolled out what seems to be a bunch of tax incentives to stimulate, again, to try to address some of the entrenched poverty. Do you think these ideas are effective, or there's been a whole history in Baltimore of trying to create tax incentives to create development, which really focuses on buildings, but nevertheless, how do you think that kind of strategy, what does it miss, and is it something that can be effective?
I don't think, there may be a success here or there, but as an overall comprehensive strategy, I don't think it's successful. And we've had several years of various types of corporate subsidies or corporate incentives to invest in Baltimore City, and you don't see a huge change. You see some successes happening. I think Under Armour development there creates jobs, and that's a positive thing. But again, I'd go back to these larger structural changes that are happening in capitalism, where Baltimore is a post-industrial city, and these changes are taking place that I'm talking about over decades. And what we're seeing is that the dynamic nature of capitalism is moving elsewhere. America is a mature economy. It'll always have dynamic sectors like the tech sector, right? But capitalism, in terms of a growing middle class and the production, because we still, consume goods. It's not like we don't need production anymore. It's all technology. We obviously are totally involved in a material world where things need to be produced. But that production is happening in China, India, Brazil, okay? And while those countries may have these economic downturns, that's a short-term issue. Long-term, they are the growing middle class. And so what you're seeing is a transformation of the American economy into this mature economy. And I think some Americans are starting to, it's not talked about in the media, but certainly the Great Recession of 2008 pointed out that many middle-class families are not holding on to middle class, So they too are going into the working class or poor or near poor. I mean, the numbers, if you just look at the numbers, it's quite phenomenal. So I'm not really optimistic in small little measures countering this larger trend. I think what we really need to do is really rethink how does the economy, how do you develop jobs and have commitments to jobs in a post-industrial economy. And I think that is something that I'm most interested in, looking at the grassroots level up. It's not an easy answer. Everybody wants an easy answer. But those answers, as you can see, that we talk about, it's just a new spin that's been happening on decades. It does not solve the entrenched poverty in Baltimore. And Baltimore has experienced this a bit further than the Great Recession of 2008. In other words, say African Americans and poor whites in Baltimore have experienced deindustrialization, the loss of jobs, the opening of service sector jobs, which are jobs, but they're very low paying. It's very hard to maintain a family lifestyle. That's been going on for decades, and it's only continuing, right? You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So, what you have in these cities, the way cities are transforming is that you're going to have a very vibrant, creative class that tend to be well paid, dynamic sector of capitalism in the United States, and then a service sector class that will be serving that creative class, right? Because you're having the hollowing out of the manufacturing and the main sort of dynamics of capitalism going elsewhere, You see what I'm saying? So in that response, I think you need to rethink about how can you change service sector jobs through unionizing, through maybe doing cooperatives, instead of being paid wages, becoming your own owner, right? These are very difficult strategies, but long term, I think this is where hope lies for the people at the bottom of the economic pyramid.
So, where is the wealth created? Is it just that we're sort of cities like Baltimore living off the wealth created in the past, or where is new wealth? We do see, though, in the upper echelons, people getting increasingly wealthier.
Right.
So there must be some wealth.
Oh, sure. The statistics are really very clear. It's just how you interpret them, all right? So if you look at productivity gains since the 1970s, American workers have worked harder than any other nation in terms of developed nation. And so productivity gains have increased steadily. Meanwhile, wages have been stagnant for the working middle. The average wage for working and middle class people have just been stagnant. So what that means is those productivity gains have gone to the owners, to the top 1%. And then, of course, if you look at the income statistics, that absolutely supports that. You see the hugest inequality in America that we've seen since the Great Depression. And that's really serious. People don't understand what that means. If you start to talk, I mean, first of all, as a nation, we don't really have the vocabulary to even talk about it. If you start to talk about it, you're seen as a socialist, you hate rich people, class warfare, you know. And when I went to school and learned economics back in the 80s, being aware of class inequality, that was being a Keynesian. That was seen as a democratic position, right? And that you had to adjust, you had a progressive tax structure, and you redistributed some of that wealth from the rich to the working class and the middle class, you know, through, you know, unemployment or whatever, various types of welfare transfers, lower taxes or those kinds of things to support a redistribution so that it's not that you get rid of rich people, but the extremes are not so extreme. Because what happens when you have this kind of extreme is that you develop an upstairs, downstairs society.
Is Baltimore a good example of what happens when wealth inequality becomes entrenched?
I mean, it's an example of that. Baltimore also has long racial tensions too, right? I mean, that's another aspect that you need to take into consideration. It's not just class, but certainly class and race and how they intersect have absolutely shaped where we are in Baltimore today. Yes.
So in a post-capitalist world, you know, if you're in the governor's chair or you're mayor, what do you look at to, you know, because anyone who's been around Baltimore, you just see the poverty is so entrenched and it is such an issue in the city. How do you really help the people who need the help? What kind of programs do you look at? I mean, what is it? You talk about grassroots. Is it a grassroots thing?
I mean, I see it as a grassroots thing. I don't vest a lot of hope. I mean, it's important to engage in the local politics and to vote for the best candidate for mayor. But when you're voting in the system that we have, they're going to have their own interests, you know? I see the ultimate hope really is people, grassroots educating and understanding. For example, the Baltimore Rebellion shed moment. It was an opening moment. Well, let me put it this way. The Baltimore Rebellion was the first time I've seen in terms of several years that the issue of violence and crime was linked to jobs and the lack of jobs. So Obama in this moment where he's announcing the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which again is another infrastructure that is enabling this shift in capitalism that I'm talking about, this long-term shift in capitalism where the developing world will have 70% of that stuff and America's this mature economy. In that, there was a moment, because the Baltimore Rebellion was happening then, right, where you saw Obama, you know, lower his guard and express quite strong empathy with the lack of jobs in Baltimore, the severe poverty, the decrepit school system, the decrepit infrastructure, right? And I was so hoping that there would be momentum in terms of that. But what happens, I think, from the mayoral level, that momentum would be seen as tax incentives or some kind of economic development plan like we've seen. What I would like to see more of, or what I'm working more with my students and hoping they're spreading the word, is that community leaders need to ask for something different. For example, there's a great economic development zone in Cleveland called the Green Project, where Cleveland Medical Institution, they have I forget the name of the actual hospital, I think Cleveland Heights Medical. It's a hospital there, it's an anchor institution. They also have universities there. They work providing jobs because they do a lot of linen, a lot of laundry work. And so they developed a workers' cooperative that actually, workers are not wage workers under a capitalist system where they're getting minimum wage. They become owners. It's a different model. They change their jobs around. It's much more fulfilling. It's very successful. You know, you have these anchor institutions like Johns Hopkins University. Instead of tax incentives, Johns Hopkins University should also feel like a commitment to the community, you know, that it's placed. And how they can provide jobs, not as, you know, minimum wage jobs, but ways that could empower people. So maybe developing a workers' cooperative that way. That project in Cleveland also expanded to get into solar panels and environmental work and urban farming. I mean, these things, if you bring in urban farming in Baltimore, you can help solve a couple of problems, right? The inadequate nutrition, the food deserts, right?
Yeah, that's true.
As well as creating green spaces instead of just boarded up row houses, you know what I mean? I mean, another aspect that's also underwriting this, again, it's a complicated problem, but you need to take the time to make these connections because you'll suffer if you don't, which is the total environmental degradation that's happening in capitalism. Even as capitalism is growing or whatever, what we're seeing in China, we just talked about, or in the US, is that what we have not been good at, because we've gone through this neoliberal period of deregulation, privatizing the commons, a lack of commitment to the collective. The environment has paid the cost, and we're seeing, you know, the air quality in Baltimore is so bad that there's still lead issues that have not been dealt with. These are serious health issues. From that moment of the Baltimore Rebellion, what have we got from that? You know, specifically, they talked about jobs, right? I would want more like top down. I would like the community leaders to think about these innovative ways. Their models are out there. Like I mentioned, go look at that Cleveland model and look at how you can build cooperatives as a way, use anchor institutions. It seems very similar. They have a medical hospital that's first rate in Cleveland, and we have a medical hospital that's first rate around the world even, right? And they have jobs that the service sector can do, but they don't have to be done in the traditional capitalist way where it's, you know, ununionized, minimum wage, part-time work. You can't provide a family on that. Rethink the ability to do that, let's say, as a worker cooperative.